Greetings and welcome to TrainSignal. You're watching Install, Configure, and Manage the Mailbox Role. It's a primary heading for the 70-341 Core Solutions Exchange 2013 certification exam. The subsection we're discussing in this lesson is Develop Backup and Recovery Solutions for the Mailbox Role and Public Folders. Under the section Develop Backup and Recovery Solutions for the Mailbox Role and Public Folders, this objective may include, but is not limited to, manage lagged copies, determine most appropriate backup solution and strategy, perform a dial tone restore, perform item level recovery, recover the public folder hierarchy, and recover a mailbox server role. So these are the various objectives for this discussion. We'll be talking about them, but not necessarily in this order. This order is a bit confusing, so we'll put this in a little bit of a better order for us to be able to digest the information. Now, much of this will be covered from a conceptual perspective. For step-by-step, in-depth coverage, you'll want to look for our Exchange Backup Recovery courses. Seriously, these objectives would take 5 or more hours to teach from beginning to end. So we're going to move fast, and we're going to go conceptual for you on this one. For the certification exam, it's essential that you understand the concepts behind how these things work, not necessarily the step-by-step procedures for each and every part of these processes. Not necessarily the step-by-step procedures. Okay, so let's get started. From a scenario perspective, we're working with a company called Landslide Technologies. They're a first response network agency that happens to have its headquarters right on the San Andreas Fault in California. So their problem is, in the off chance they have a major disaster come their way, obviously they're worried about an earthquake, how would they recover their data, and how would they recover it fast? Our goal is going to be to map out options available for disaster recovery beyond high availability. They're currently using a single site DAG, so they already have a form of high availability in place. We can recommend that they make their highly available solution go to a secondary data center, and so that might make sense. The cost to accomplish that, however, is an issue for them. So they don't have the funding to be able to have a separate data center in a secondary location. So obviously we're going to be talking with them more about disaster recovery solutions, backup and recovery type solutions, as opposed to increasing their DAG. Let's start our discussion with a discussion around lagged copies. Remember, a lagged mailbox database copy is a database that uses a delayed replay lag time, which allows you to commit the log files to the database over time. So you can go back to a point in time all the way back to even 14 days ago. By delaying that replay of logs, you have the ability to recover to that point in the past. In the event, let's say, there's a logical database or store corruption. Or even, let's say, in the event you don't have deleted item retention set properly. Let's say you're not using the default 30-day mailbox deleted item retention, and you have it set to 3 days. And so somebody decided to delete a bunch of mailboxes, and the 3 days have passed. Well, if you have a lagged mailbox database copy that goes back 4 or more days, you would be able to restore that database with those mailboxes. So you can see how that might work. Obviously, this is not the kind of thing that you hope is happening daily, because then you have somewhat of a Three Stooges type of environment, and you probably should fire the people that are making these mistakes on a daily basis. Ultimately, though, it does help to make the point in terms of when you might activate a lagged copy. With Landslide Technologies, they have 2 servers. One is their active mailbox server, and the other is a passive copy of the database. Now, they've asked us about lagged copies, whether or not they should have a lagged copy rather than a passive copy. We're discouraging that because we feel that the passive copy is essential for them to be able to recover quickly. However, if they did have lagged copies, how would they recover in the event of a problem? Well, with activating lagged copies, it can go one of 2 ways. You can activate the database and then replay all log files to bring the database current. Or you can activate the database and replay up to a point in time. This is a little bit trickier because it requires using the ESCUtil utility for bringing that database up to speed. The process is done through the Exchange Management Shell. you use the suspend-mailbox database copy, the VSS admin, which takes a VSS volume shadow copy snapshot of volumes containing the copy. The procedure varies from that point forward depending on whether or not you want to activate to a specific point in time, activate by replaying all uncommitted log files, or activate using the safety net recovery. The process for activating lagged copies is listed out in TechNet, and the article itself is mentioned at the end of this discussion in the additional research section. But let's jump over and take a look at this TechNet article so you can see how it maps out your various options. So here we can see the Activate a Lagged Mailbox Database Copy TechNet article, and if we just scroll down, you can see we do have options as far as how we want to activate the lagged mailbox database copy. We can go to a specific point in time. This is a little bit more complicated. It involves using the VSS admin to create the various snapshots that we're talking about. We have to use that ESC utility to perform the recovery operation. And ultimately we can resume the mailbox database copy. Now that's different from the other options where we can use safety net recovery or replaying all uncommitted log files. You can see we still use the VSS admin, but in this case we're going to use the move-active mailbox database commandlet to get things back in order. And then with the safety net recovery, again we do the same thing. We suspend mailbox database copy, use VSS admin, and then in this case we preserve and move off the log files for the copy being activated so that they aren't replayed when the database is mounted. And then we use the mount-database commandlet with the accept data loss parameter. And then what will happen is the database will automatically mount and request redelivery of missing messages from SafetyNet. So we have a couple of different options here. The choice we take depends upon why we're actually using our lagged copy to recover. Was it some kind of corruption? Was it some kind of accident? Whatever the case, we have options with lagged copies. Now, before we can worry about restoring, we need to know what can be lost. That has to be clear in mind. So we have items, mailboxes, databases, and servers. And you can see how these escalate in severity as we go down the list. Somewhere in all of this is the public folder hierarchy as well, which is actually connected to the public folder mailbox. Now, based upon RTO and RPO, you can design your backup recovery strategies. Now, we discuss RPO and RTO in a later session on service level agreements. The RTO, or recovery time objective, is basically the acceptable time without service being available. And the RPO, or recovery point objective, is how much data, past and present, must be restorable during the RTO. Now, a DAG can assist with both RTO and RPO for your service level agreement. And that's because DAGs allow you to continue working immediately with up to the moment information. And in the case of our scenario, they have a DAG. However, they also are concerned with being able to recover from some type of disaster. Obviously, if both members of the DAG are damaged in some way during an earthquake, they're going to need more than the DAG itself. So, a couple of options in terms of backup recovery. The first is you can use built-in Windows backup. Now, there are limitations to that, we'll talk about it, but one of the benefits there is that you can actually take the data and actually leave the building with it. You can also use System Center Data Protection Manager, which allows you to have continuous data protection, and you can use a third-party backup recovery solution. There are pros and cons to going with each of these. Obviously, the big pro to Windows Backup is that it's free. The expense of third-party backups, however, may be worth it. So let's take a moment and talk about different types of backup software. Alright, so the first point to remember with backup software is that the software that you choose must support Volume Shadow Copy Service backups. That's VSS backups for Exchange Server 2013. So a Volume Shadow Copy backup or a VSS backup takes a snapshot of the database. Rather than streaming the data from the Exchange server itself, it just takes a snapshot. So in order for this to work, on the Exchange server, the Exchange Server VSS writer triggers the snapshot, and it ensures that the Exchange Server databases are consistent before that snapshot is taken. There have been some changes to the Exchange Server VSS portions with Exchange 2013, so it's important that you make sure if you're going with a third-party backup solution, a non-Microsoft solution, you have to make sure that your solution works with Exchange 2013. Now, that is the case with Windows Backup. There are pros and cons to Windows Backup. So for starters, as we already mentioned, it's free. And logically, it supports VSS backups for Exchange. It runs locally, which could be a pro and a con in a sense. It might not be a problem for you to run it locally. However, in larger environments, Windows Backup may not work for them because they may want some type of management where they can centralize the backup process. So this is just something to keep in mind. Now, it backs up to local disk or a network share, but not to tape. And so you can back up to disk and you can take the disk external with you. But obviously, if it doesn't allow for tape backups, and let's say you already have a robotic arm tape solution that you've been using for years, Windows Backup isn't going to cut it. But most likely, you also then have a third-party solution for your backup. Windows Backup restores full databases. So it doesn't allow for item level recovery, that is instant item level recovery. You can use a recovery database for mailboxes and or items. So that's a little bit of a pain, to be honest with you. If you've never worked with this, a recovery database is a database that's mounted on the mailbox server, but it's not accessible to users. So it's not used for mailboxes that end users can actually access. So you use a recovery database when you want to recover data from a database, like recovering either the entire database or a specific mailbox, or even messages within a mailbox that is part of a recovered database. But it's not necessarily easy. There's a bunch of different steps in the process that we'll talk about in a moment. Another negative about Windows Backup is that you cannot back up the passive DAG copy. So there may be certain reasons why you would want to back up the passive. For one thing, the active may be very busy, and so you might want to focus on backing up the passive copy. But again, Windows Backup cannot do that. Now, Data Protection Manager is another tool. It's part of the System Center suite, and it's not free, but it's not killer expensive either. So it's within a reasonable range in terms of cost. It requires agents be installed on the Exchange servers, but as a result of that, you have centralized management because you can use your Data Protection Manager console and the agents report back. With Data Protection Manager, you're able to restore databases and mailboxes, but not item level recovery. You can, however, back up passive copies of the database from a DAG. Now, one of the other nice things about Data Protection Manager, and why it's a winner over Windows Backup, is because it doesn't just back up Exchange. It can back up your SharePoint, it can back up Hyper-V, virtualized systems. So there are a lot of other uses for Data Protection Manager. Same as Windows Backup. You can use it for other things, not just Exchange. But the expense that you put out there for Data Protection Manager, it's not just for your Exchange backup recovery. It can be used for other things. It's a much more robust tool, and it provides for continuous data protection, not just where you do a backup at a point in time, like with Windows Backup, where you say, okay, it's 8 o'clock at night and everyone's gone home, let's do a backup. With Data Protection Manager, it doesn't just take a snapshot at some time at night, but it works on slices of time that you can establish to keep that data protected. And then we have third-party solutions. Now, third-party solutions are more expensive for the most part, although the price does vary depending on the type that you choose and the feature set of the third-party solution. So I say more expensive, but it really depends. Data Protection Manager is a cost, it's an expense, and you have to compare that to a third-party solution. Now, one of the nice things about third-party solutions is that some of these solutions can perform item level restore. So that allows you to locate the item, select it, tell it to go back into a user's mailbox, and boom, there it is. This cuts out the whole recovery database and all the nightmare that comes with that. So sometimes it's worth having the third-party solution. Another option is to use some kind of archiving solution, a hosted archiving solution perhaps, where if a message goes missing, you can restore that message back to the inbox of the user. In fact, with some solutions that are hosted for archive, the individuals themselves can actually locate their message and restore it. but they won't be able to delete the message from the archive, and that's really the whole point, is that the archive retains that data so that you can use it for compliance in the event of, let's say, some type of a legal case where you need e-discovery, or simply to remain in compliance by retaining things for a period of 7 years or so. In those cases, an archive solution really would work best. In those cases, an archive solution can also double as an item level recovery solution. Now, as far as what you use to back up to, well, we talked about how Windows Backup doesn't back up to tape. In some cases, you want to back up to tape, and so third-party solutions can work well. Or you can back up to disk. You might have a SAN solution. So often the third-party solution itself will dictate what you can back up to. Let's talk about when and why to use backup solutions. You know, a DAG, it's an amazing thing. Database availability groups are awesome when it comes to immediate availability, but it's not helpful with historical data, nor can it serve as an archive. So just in meditating on that statement, it's not helpful with historical data. Why? Because a DAG is up to date. Even a lagged copy can only go back 14 days. So historical data, we're talking, let's say something that was deleted a year ago. Can you get it back? Well, not without a backup. So that's why there are times when backup solutions are essential. And so again, a DAG, it cannot serve as a solid backup solution or as an archive. DAGs have their place. It's also good to note that archives have their place too. Although backups may meet archive requirements, there are modern archive solutions that may suit your needs better. There's an archive feature built into Exchange 2013. So you might need to use an amalgam of all of these different solutions kind of merged together in order to meet the needs for compliance and also meet your recovery needs for data. You might say, okay, I know when I need to use a DAG. If one server goes down, the other server keeps working. That's pretty clear. And you might say, I understand the concept of an archive where I have archived data for compliance, for e-discovery, and so forth. And that archived data may actually help when it comes to recovering a message. But when do I need a backup? Well, you need a backup if you want to recover an item that's either been hard deleted or an item that has gone past deleted item retention time. That's the case if the single item recovery is not enabled, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But in those cases, if you don't have an archive solution in place, you don't have a way to access that message again, well, then you'll need to recover it from a backup. You'll need it if you want to recover a database that isn't part of a DAG. So obviously we like the flexibility and ease of use from having a DAG, the availability that it offers, but it's expensive. You have to have another server. You have to be prepared with that server to run the Exchange software. You have to pay for licensing for all of that. So if you don't have a DAG, then you're going to need to have some kind of backup for that database. Even if you have a mailbox server that is part of a DAG, what if you have a database that doesn't have a passive copy for whatever reason? Let's say you just forgot to make the passive copy of one of your databases. It happens, so in that case, having a backup would be very helpful. And in the event you need to recover a lost server, that requires backed up information like databases. Alright, so you've decided, okay, we're going to need to take backups, I guess, so what do we need to back up? Well, obviously, we always think the databases are the most important parts to a backup. And they are, really, thanks to database portability. With database portability, you don't need to restore databases on the same servers that back them up. So you can restore and you can mount databases on any Exchange server running 2013, any mailbox server in the organization. Now, this is useful when, let's say, one of several mailbox servers fails. And so if you want to recover the database, you can recover it to one of the other functioning mailbox servers. You can also restore to a recovery database located on a different server. So that's helpful as well, because thanks to database portability, you can recover it and then you can move it back into a production environment without having to recover the server first. So that's really a nice thing, being able to move a database to any other Exchange mailbox server within the organization. However, there may be other things that you want to remember to back up. For example, message tracking logs, in the event you want to retain those logs. Or let's say you have unified messaging in your environment, and let's say you have custom audio prompts. Let's say you got the president of the company to take the time to make a special greeting for folks that call into the unified messaging auto attendants. Well, you certainly wouldn't want to go back to the president of the company and say, by the way, we lost everything when the server went down. Make sure you have a backup of those audio prompts. With client access servers, you want to make sure you have backups of your server certificates. You want to make sure that you have either documented or backed up the IIS configuration. So these are little things that you want to make sure you back up. Yes, of course, the databases are indeed the most important part, but it's good to keep in mind these other pieces as well. Let's talk about server recovery. What happens if an entire server goes down? Well, with Exchange, your concern is really the server role. Typically, you don't have multiple things running on that server, so that server would be either a mailbox server, a client access server, or a mixture of both. So the goal here is to restore the server role, which you can do faster than restoring the whole server. Now, when we say faster, the assumption is that you already have another server in the mix that you can install Exchange on. So if that's not the case, then no, this is going to take you a while anyway, and you're going to have to restore the whole server. But let's assume you have another server you can install Exchange on, or perhaps even another Exchange server that you can add the server role to. So let's say you have a client access server on one box and a mailbox server on another, and the client access server fails. Well, you can restore the entire server, and no doubt you will, but in the meantime, you can just install the client access server role on the mailbox server. This way, you get things up and running faster. Now, when it comes to recovering the lost server, here's what you need to do. You need to reset the computer account for that lost server. You do that through the Active Directory users and computers. If you're not really sure how to do that, just do a quick search on how to reset a computer account. Then you want to set up the new server, or the new virtualized server. You want to try and make it exactly the same. So you want to make sure you use the same software, make sure that you have all the prereqs set up for it, and you want to make sure especially that you use the same computer name. That's essential, otherwise the server will not be able to restore all of the Exchange settings from Active Directory to that server. At that point, you want to join the server to the domain. And then install all your Exchange 2013 prerequisites. And then you're going to want to run the setup command. Now, one of the nice things about Exchange is that it stores a lot of the server configuration information, in fact all of it in this case for a recovery, in Active Directory. So when you run the command setup /m:/recover server, it will actually reach into Active Directory, and because the computer has the same name, it will actually set up that server exactly the same as what it was. Now, if it's a mailbox server, you're still going to have to recover databases. That's not something that it will do for you. But it does set it up as part of the organization using the same information as what you had before. So that's really great, because all of the little nitty-gritty things that you may have configured, like your unified messaging settings, perhaps transport rules and so forth, all of that will be restored to the server. You want to remember to use the /I accept Exchange server license terms as part of the command. And then once the server is restored, you can then start working on restoring databases, or in the case of unified messaging prompts, restoring those prompts and so forth. Let's talk for a moment about item recovery that's built in, because oftentimes that's a frustration, that you have a single item that you need to restore. And so what do? Do you have to set up a whole new server? No, that was the old days. That was before we had all these great software solutions at our disposal. Well, then do you have to restore a database? Do you have to use a recovery database? How do we get back a single item? Well, there are some built-in features right within Exchange, and this could be very helpful when it comes to being an administrator. For starters, with items, there is a deleted item retention time. The default is 14 days, but if you feel you need more time than that, you can easily adjust it. The real benefit here is that end users can go in and they can undelete the items that they've deleted. So when they delete something, it typically goes into their deleted items. If they delete it from there, well, it goes into a deletions subfolder that is actually something they can't see or touch very easily, but it's in a recoverable items folder. and from Outlook they can restore it even from there. They might even soft delete an item by pressing Shift and Delete, and so again it goes into this deletions folder under recoverable items. So that's built right into Exchange, the ability to recover deleted items. The same is true of mailboxes. As an administrator, if you delete a mailbox, the default is 30 days. You can go 30 days and then you can restore that mailbox if the person comes back. So this may help to mitigate loss and restoration frustrations. Now I mentioned this recoverable items folder. It's located in the non-IPM subtree of each mailbox. It's not something that end users can see. And it includes the following subfolders. There's a deletion subfolder, which, as I just mentioned, it contains all the items deleted from the deleted items folder, or items that have been soft deleted. So you can access this, or end users can access this, through the Recover Deleted Items feature in Outlook or Outlook Web App. Then there's a Versions folder. This is where if you have a mailbox on in-place hold, or what they call legal hold or litigation hold, or if you've enabled single item recovery, which we'll talk about in a moment, then this subfolder will contain the original as well as modified copies of the deleted items. But again, this isn't visible to end users. There's a Purges folder. So if, let's say, a mailbox is on legal hold, or if single item recovery is enabled, this subfolder will contain all items that are hard deleted. So the end user thinks they deleted things, but they're not deleted. No, they're in the Purges folder in that case. There's a Discovery Holds folder. If, let's say, in-place hold is enabled, this folder contains items that meet the hold query parameters and are perhaps hard deleted. There is the Audits subfolder, which, if mailbox audit logging is enabled for a mailbox, then this subfolder contains the log entries. And then there's the Calendar Logging folder, which really contains calendar changes that occur within a mailbox. And this isn't available to end users either. So we've talked about this. I've mentioned it a couple of times. Single item recovery is different from deleted item retention times. If a mailbox has single item recovery enabled, the Managed Folder Assistant will not purge deleted items. So ultimately, this is an extra layer of protection so that you're able to recover items that might have been accidentally deleted by an end user or perhaps deleted through automated processes such as the Managed Folder Assistant. In the past, the frustration of this was that we would have to recover the mailbox or a mailbox database from our backup. But through the Exchange Management Shell, you can enable single item recovery for any given mailbox, and then when the Managed Folder Assistant processes the recoverable items folder that we just talked about, when it looks in things like the Purges subfolder, those items are not purged if the deleted item retention period hasn't elapsed for that item. So in that case, you also establish a time frame for how long you want the single item recovery to be for. But it's different from the time frame of your deleted item retention times. Let's talk for a moment about working with the recovery database. So you can use a recovery database to perform the same or alternate dial tone recovery. We're going to talk about dial tone recoveries in a moment. You can use the recovery database for obviously recovering your databases. You can also use it for mailbox recovery or item level recovery. But the process is somewhat involved, somewhat convoluted. You start off by creating this recovery database through the Exchange Management Shell. You use the new -mailbox database -recovery. You provide the name and you indicate the server. Then you can recover data using the new -mailbox restore request commandlet. So after you've created a recovery database, you can restore a mailbox database into that recovery database by using your backup application. Or if you have the database and its log files in the file system, you can actually copy them over to the RDB file structure. And because databases are portable within Exchange, that will work. So you can actually just copy the files in and it will work. Then you can use this new -mailbox restore request commandlet to extract data from the recovered database. After you extract that data, the data can then be exported to a folder or merged into an existing mailbox. So Do recovery databases work? Yes, they do work. They allow you to recover data from a backup or a copy of a database without disrupting the end user's access to their current data or their current database. And again, if you want to see this in action, I recommend you take a look at our Exchange Backup Recovery courses. It will walk you through every part of the process. And rest assured, it is a process. Let's talk now about dial tone recoveries, because the recovery database is actually something that's essential before you can do a dial tone recovery. So let's say you need to get your people up and running fast with the ability to send and receive email. Let's say their data can wait. Let's say they need their data at some point, obviously, but they're not so concerned about that. The big thing is, hey, I need to work right now. I need to be able to send an email and receive an email right now. If that's your problem, then the dial tone restore is your answer. Now, the way this works is, well, pretty convoluted, as you can see as well. Basically, you create an empty database, and then you change the database quickly for users. For example, you use the new dash mailbox database, you give it a name. In this case, we'll say DTDB, dial tone database. You provide an EDB file path for that database. Then you use the get dash mailbox dash database, and we're saying database 1, DB1, but whatever the name is of the database that you need to now get those users up and running fast, or if it's multiple ones, you can certainly work through that as well. But you use the dash database, you get the mailboxes, and then you pipeline that out to set dash mailbox dash database, and in this case, DTDB. So this is a real database. It's not a recovery database. That would not work for your end users. You create a real database, and then, being that, let's say, the database that they're existing on is not functioning, let's say DB1 is down, then you can just move them over to this new database, this dial tone recovery database. Then you put in the mount dash database, and you mount the dial tone recovery database. Now what happens for end users at that point is, thanks to their ability to auto-discover where their mailbox is located, they're going to be up and running pretty fast. And that's great. But they're going to then complain to you, hey, I can send and receive email, but I cannot see my pre-existing email. And you tell them, yes, we know, just work through the day, we'll get this worked out. Now then you want to create the recovery database. You can call it something like RDB, recovery database.edb. And what you want to do is restore or copy the backed up data to it. You're going to mount and dismount it, and then copy that data to a safe place. So you restore the data, you mount it, you dismount it, and then you copy it to another location. Keep it safe. When the time comes that your end users are done, you want to dismount your dial tone database. And what you're going to do is you're actually going to swap the two. Now you might be wondering, why am I doing this? Well, here's the problem. You can recover your backup, let's say, from the night before. But what about all of the work that has been taking place during the day? Well, now you have two databases. You have one that has a ton of information from all the time that the users worked before, that was part of the backup, and you have what took place during the day. So of course they've sent and received emails during the day. Now, as far as why you're swapping the two, you're swapping the two because it's a lot easier and faster to merge the data from one day into a functioning database that you restored, as opposed to the other way around. So what you're going to do is you're going to dismount the dial tone database, you're going to move those files to the recovery database and mount it there. You're going to take the moved recovered database and files from where you put it in a safe place, you're going to move it over to the dial tone folder, and you're going to mount it there. So ultimately what you've just done is you've just restored the pre-existing database, which is great. Your end users will be happy. But now, of course, if they logged in, they would complain that they have email, they're up and running, they have their older email, but they don't have anything from that day. So you're going to need to use the get-mailbox-database. You're going to go with the dial tone database. You're going to pipeline that out to the new -mailbox restore request -target mailbox, and then target the recovery database. And ultimately what you're going to do is you're merging the database data from the dial tone over to the recovery database. But of course, you're renaming and switching as you go. When it's all said and done, you were able to get your users back up and running with a dial tone recovery. You were able to merge the two together in the end, and they should have a fully recovered mailbox with their pre-existing data and the data from the day that they worked. At that point, you want to dismount and remove the RDB database. So I very much appreciate that this is a complex solution to see in bullet points. I understand that. And so again, I recommend that you take a look at the course on Exchange Backup and Recovery. However, in addition, under additional research, there's an article by Henrik Walther. He's one of the finest Exchange writers out there, and it's on the msexchange.org site. It's entitled Demystifying the Exchange Dial Tone Restore Method. So I absolutely recommend that you take the time to read that article because it will help to round out your understanding of the dial tone recovery. Let's switch gears completely and let's talk about recovering public folder information. Because public folders are in mailboxes, when you delete items, they go in the dumpster. They go in there for 14 days by default. So they can be restored from recovery deleted items. So that's the good news. Now, you can make public folders more highly available through a DAG, and you can recover them with the database, the same as all other mailboxes. So the good news is, if you do need to recover public folders and the public folder mailbox, especially the one that contains the primary master hierarchy, well, it's possible by recovering them the same as you would any other mailbox. So to implement public folders in Exchange Server 2013, you first create a primary public folder hierarchy mailbox. Now you don't call it that, you actually just create a public folder mailbox, but it creates it as the primary hierarchy. And that public folder mailbox, the primary, contains the only writable copy of the public folder hierarchy. After that, as you create additional public folder mailboxes, they literally say that they are secondary in terms of the hierarchy. The secondary public folder mailboxes will contain read-only versions of the public folder hierarchy. So it's essential to keep that primary one up and running. And so that's one of the reasons why you might want to make it more highly available through a DAG. But the good news is that you can recover that primary mailbox through a recovery of the database, the same as other mailboxes. So that's good news, that it is recoverable. At times, however, in Exchange 2013, if you remove the public folder mailbox, which holds the master hierarchy, if you do this abruptly, or if you delete something using ADSI edit, it doesn't get removed properly. And so you'll note here, to recreate the public folder master hierarchy, it's a bit of a nightmare. One Exchange admin found out how bad it was, and he says it's a do-over move. So the link is listed here as far as how you would recreate this. You'll see that it's quite involved. I don't put this in additional research because I don't think you're ever going to have to do this, but in the event it does come up, I wanted to let you know that it is fixable, but it is a bit frustrating. Alright, so what are we going to do for Landslide Technologies? Well, we're going to encourage them to use Windows Backup, and that's really because of the cost, because they already have a DAG in place. So the goal here is for them to back up to disk and to take that disk off site with them. We would also recommend a hosted archive solution as well to ensure compliance and also complete mail recovery. We recommend that they have a documented set of instructions for their environment so they can perform disaster recovery under various circumstances. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, why didn't we recommend that they have some kind of off-site solution, maybe a cloud-based solution for backup, or perhaps some method of having their DAG extend to a secondary data center? Again, it comes down to cost. All of these things are great solutions, but depending on the company and whether or not they have the money to spend, we can't recommend solutions that are just outside their reach. So it comes down to things like RTO, RPO, what their circumstances are financially, and then we present options. So if they didn't have a DAG in place and perhaps couldn't afford one, we might recommend that they go with Data Protection Manager, although I think the cost would pretty much be the same, so that they really could do better with a DAG in this case. The nice thing about Data Protection Manager is that it would also cover other solutions they have in their environment. So each environment is a little bit different. This is not a hard, fast rule that this is what you would want to recommend to every client. But it is a hard, fast rule to recommend that every client has a documented set of instructions for their particular environment so that they can perform disaster recovery. That should be something that should be part of the service level agreement as well, that those instructions will be documented and they will be updated as the environment changes. Some additional research you may want to look into includes activating a lagged mailbox copy, performing single item recovery, demystifying the Exchange dial tone restore method by Henrik Walther, and recovery database in Exchange Server 2013. Again, I also encourage you to check out TrainSignal's Exchange Backup and Recovery courses, because that will provide you with the step-by-step instructions for performing different types of recovery, whether it's an item recovery, a mailbox recovery, a database recovery, or an entire server recovery. And in the training, there's also a look at different tools, whether it's Data Protection Manager or other third-party solutions. So we hope you found this informative. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.